All right, hello. This is the October 24th, 2023 meeting of the Node Loaders team. And yes, we've got a few things on the agenda today. Well, I guess they're all kind of unofficial in my comment, but there's I don't know if there's anything to discuss about the detection thing. That was the first thing I mentioned. About getting to the point where we can eventually remove the common.js loader, import maps, which Wes is championing, the idea of having the initialize hook define the other hooks, which Jeff is championing, and then external format support, which Jacob is doing. So we got, I guess, we don't really need to talk about the ones that I was working on unless anyone has any comments on those. So I'm happy to skip those or put those at the end if people want. And yeah, we can go down the list for the others. Does that sound good to everybody?
Mhm.
All right. Is there any one in particular we should do first? Wes was here first, so I think he maybe deserves to. He should get something for showing up first. So
Yeah,
maybe we can do
okay.
import maps first, and then
doing
I think it was Jacob second, and then we could do external format.
Okay. Oh, sorry, Wes, you sent me a bunch of messages. I just saw them.
I did actually. That's probably what we should talk about.
Okay.
So I had DMs with you and Jeffrey on the and I sent you both the little first commit that I made that just sort of got things barely functional. And Jeffrey's point was we should be doing this in the the default resolver, not the way we had talked about it. So I thought maybe we could just quickly talk through maybe Jeffrey could talk about.
Yeah. So if you look in that default resolve function that's in like the ESM loader, it already has kind of like two big code blocks of like ways to do resolution, like the way we're all familiar with the ESM resolution algorithm, and also this I think it's policies or permissions. I think policies, which is like if someone defines a policy.json file, they can just like map, yeah, I want fs to resolve to this or whatever, which is not that different from import maps. And so I was suggesting that we just put this in there. Like if, like, say we have an import map flag, it would just be if the import map flag has a value, load the import map if we don't have it already, and then do the resolution via that. And that just like, so it's like choose between one of these three resolution algorithms. But it's all contained within default resolve. So that way, if someone does have custom loaders registered, then it's like if they call like next resolve, it'll function like the way it does, where it'll return like what the import map resolved instead of what the ESM resolution algorithm resolved. Sorry, Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, just while I'm on the call, on that note, with the default resolve pattern, one of the things that I brought up in the thread that I think got me invited to this meeting was the possibility that a load hook might want to resolve a file and have that resolution be processed by loaders. And so I was wondering if there's any thought given to that sort of use case, or if it even exists.
Yeah, so there's a couple things we've been bouncing around with that. So the first is just there is import.meta.resolve. And I forget the problem there is that it has to be synchronous per spec, but the way we can make it be sync is by having custom resolve hooks be running off thread. So that, but then if you run import.meta.resolve in a hook, you're running on the thread, and so it's like, well, now we can't syncify it. So I want to say what we did, it's either throws right now. If you try to do import meta resolve in a hook, either it throws or
It's not
just
there, I
returns a
think.
promise. Does
I
it
think it's
throw?
not present. It doesn't exist.
Or it's not present. Okay, it's similar. So yeah, so that was one thing. I think the other idea that we've been bouncing around is trying to extract some of these pieces of what happens under the hood, like the ESM resolution algorithm. We could just provide a function like import resolve from node module or ESM resolve from node module or whatever we call it, that is essentially the default resolve function that we were just talking about. And so now someone can just call it directly from wherever. It's a sync function, you know, it'll just become a new API on the node module built in.
That would,
we were planning on doing that in general, just because like that's really useful for like bundlers
Yeah.
that want to, you know, act like Node is acting as they're putting together a bundle. So it's already on the Loaders roadmap as like a to-do item that like we need to just expose some of these things like in general.
That's why I was originally thinking we would have the import maps as its own loader, because the default resolve function is monstrous. It's hundreds of lines. So we totally could shove it in there. But I was thinking if it's more isolated, then we could, one, avoid making default resolve even larger, and two, it could be exposed independently if we wanted.
I don't think it's that large. I want to say it was like 100, but to your point, sure. I mean, but we could also just break it up. Like default resolve could just be like, you know, if import map, call import map resolve, else if policy, call policy resolve, else call ESM resolve, whatever. And then those could be three separate things that we export, like I was just describing this, like, you know, import ESM resolve from node module. We could export them individually if like you wanted to specifically call import map resolve or something like that. I think the thing that bothered me about essentially having import maps be like a built-in custom loader or custom hook that gets registered via the flag is that then it initializes the whole machinery of the separate thread to run hooks when we just don't need it. You know,
No,
like
you don't have to do that. You don't have to initialize the worker at all, because we could just prepend it to the list of hooks. So we wouldn't count it as a custom loader. It would just be one of Node's built-in things. So when you call default resolve currently doesn't call next, but in this case it would. So we would either feed default resolve a no op for next, or check to see if the thing is happening or something. Probably the no op is better, but anyway, yeah. So we don't need to initialize.
In my commit, I'm pretty sure we do initialize it, or I'm just messing around. So this is not, you know, by any means final here, but I think what is in that commit is using the worker like version. At the time I could not figure out how to get it where we had talked about in the hooks.js to actually load without it starting up the worker stuff. But maybe I was doing it wrong. This is where I would love you to tell me.
I'm like 90-something% sure this is possible.
Okay.
I mean, well, I mean, throwing this out though, like since we already have essentially, you know, an if block inside default resolve now for two different resolution algorithms, couldn't we maybe just implement import maps following that pattern? And then if we wanted to break it up into essentially chained resolvers within Node core, that could just be like its own PR. Like if there's some, you know, merit to that approach in general.
I don't see a ton, like from what I'm thinking of, explicit pros and cons either way. I think the one thing is the user experience here of having two methods to do effectively the same thing via policies or import maps, I think is confusing. And I think that by doing it all in one place, at least somebody could go read that one file and sort of understand how they interplay. Unless we were going to say import maps totally, if it's turned on, you can't change a resolution with policies or vice versa. Like, I think if it's in two places and we have two things that can kind of interact in ways that I think would look pretty mysterious when they're in two separate code paths, I think that's maybe the only like big pro I think that I can think of to moving it into default resolve, is at least then it's all like, you know, in one spot.
Well, policy is also a security mechanism. So I think we can't like just say one or the other. They have like policy.
So that means we have to put it in default resolve then, because you're right. The policy thing isn't just mapping arbitrary things the way import maps does. It also has that integrity check.
Yes.
So import maps needs to be one merged chunk of code that's like load the policy.json if it exists, load the import map if it exists, and then do the instructions for both of them essentially. And you'll have to define if you want one to take priority from, like, I would assume that the policy would take precedence, like it would first resolve it through, like if you loaded both, first you would resolve it via the import map. Then if the policy defines some kind of alias or whatever, that would apply afterward. And then you do the integrity check, something along those lines.
Yeah, you have to do it that way because the policy has to be the last check, because the import map could change something. And if that happens after, then it sort of does a shell game with what's happening.
And you want the integrity check to be run against whatever's in the end going to be loaded.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Wouldn't that be better suited at making pulling these things apart?
Again, I think technically I don't see them being super different. The one thing about the way I have it now is that as soon as I opened up the default resolve and started figuring out what was going on in there, I was like, oh yeah, there's like a ton of implicit dependency there that end users are going to have some confusion about if they don't have we're going to need some pretty clear docs that talk about like, how does import maps play with policies? And I maybe end users aren't going to go read the code, but like, I kind of like the theory of having all of the things that are involved with this particular part, which is strictly just remapping file paths. I could see an argument to be made to put it all in one place just for, helping people who do want to go read the source be able to like find the spot, read through the one thing and say, okay, import map happens first. Once that's resolved, I get that.
It doesn't literally need to be like in the body of the same function. Like if you want to put it in some function that default resolve calls, that's fine with me. It was more that like, it felt like overkill to be adding it to a chain of functions to be called through the machinery of like calling chained hooks. You know what I mean? Like there was an earlier version of chaining where like it always had one by default. Like we had, like the chain would by default would have one resolve hook and one load hook, and then global preload just had none. But I think like in the final version, it was like, the length was 0 unless the user loaded any custom ones, something like that. So that was kind of why I was like, oh, this is how we landed with that. I don't know if we should.
I think it's still
back.
I think the minimum size is still 1. And then I was looking at it the other day because it's changed quite a bit. We have a list, and then we also have like a linked list. But I think the list is, we have a linked list, and I think the linked list is built from the original list, and then we kind of just like ignore the list. But I feel like if it is using the chaining mechanism, that is like an easier way to separate, like from a mental model perspective, like this import maps thing, it has done its thing. and like it can't do any more. So we know like this is done. All of the import map stuff is over here. And now we feed whatever that is into the policy. The policy says like, yay, nay, whatever. And then we're sort of done.
Jeff, to answer your question, I don't think so, because it's a security thing. So it's like, if someone just wants to do mappings of stuff, that's essentially making a loader that does an import map, which certainly people do today. But usually most people use policies for the integrity check, which it wouldn't make much sense to do dynamically. Look, if as long as it doesn't, fire up a whole separate thread just because of this, then I don't care that much. If it's chained or the default resolve function just calls another function like any, dependent function, Wes, I think whatever makes the most sense to you in terms of how it
that's the
feels.
problem. I'm very not opinionated here at all, because this is my very first contribution in this area. So
I was assuming that it was
I-
firing up the separate thread.
yeah.
That's why I came out so strongly that it needed to go to default resolve. But if
Take
it
a
somehow
look at-
doesn't,
Take a look at the
cause
PR.
that,
'Cause
then-
maybe I'm just missing something, and we could have just moved the way it's invoked somewhere, and or maybe I'm even wrong exactly on how it's all working. Again, I'm learning here. So take a look. I posted the link there because it works right now. And obviously if it works and I don't have to change it, that's probably ideal.
well, I haven't looked at it yet, but have you added all the tests? Like,
No. Oh, no. Yeah. This was like purely like, let me just see if I can get something. Oh, I have a test. No, I guess I do have. I have a couple tests that just see if, again,
like a
all
very
it does
basic
is
case
remap
that
like
works.
one import path to another. So it's not nearly robust enough to call it tested yet. But it does, as far as I can tell, and this was the thing that took me actually the most time to even get working, was when I just was trying to get it to be added to the chain. That wasn't enough. I had to actually go find the spot in Loader.js where it subs in the customized module loader. And if
That was
customized,
what I was thinking, was that like we don't use those hook chains at all unless customized module
Yes.
loader gets instantiated, and that doesn't get instantiated unless the user's registered hooks. That was my understanding, and I could be wrong.
Yes. And
But-
that is why your thing is almost certainly creating that worker, is because you're doing it sort of later. So it's basically like you're doing it when it's checking to see if it needs to create those things, and then you're telling it, yes, do. And
Yeah.
unbeknownst to you.
yeah. So yeah, I'm happy to move it so that it doesn't do that. I just don't know if I know exactly how to do that just yet. I'll have to look around. But yeah, I agree that it
I think
should.
either move it into the body of default resolve or move it as a function in the same file as default resolve and then have default resolve call it,
Yeah.
and just
Yeah, I
get
mean,
it working. And then, we can do a follow-up that moves it into the chain, if that makes more sense.
Okay.
If that works for you,
So
Jacob.
Well, yeah, sure, whichever.
yeah, I'm fine doing either. It's probably easiest for me to just make it a method and call it in default resolve. But
Okay.
I'd
again,
say just do
and
that
anyway,
and get it working, and we can always improve it later.
yeah, I just don't
Um,
want to open up the PR and have a bunch of people be like, whoa, no. Like, I'd like to get it at least sort of in the shape that we think it,
I think like the probably the biggest complaints you would get if you were to open this PR today would be, hey, let's make sure it doesn't spawn a new thread, because that's a big performance hit. And
Yeah.
B, oh, it needs all the tests. Like there must be some repo somewhere with a big test suite of like platform tests for import maps. I don't know if we need all of them, but we need like some reasonable amount of tests that we've covered the spec of implementing import maps. I think if you have both of those, then yeah, this shouldn't be very controversial.
okay. So
And I'm happy to review a branch before you open it too. And
oh
we
yeah,
can-
yeah. That was why I figured I'd post it to y'all before opening it to Node. I mean, you can see the branch I was working off of last week that I linked there. I think there's a couple more questions though. So, oh man, I think I had a
Are
list
they
here.
quick questions?
Yeah, I don't know.
We have other
Yeah, we
topics
have
too.
other topics on the agenda. So maybe we just move on and we can handle these async.
Yeah, there's the Node.js Loaders Slack. You can also just create a Slack channel just for this if you want.
I'll use the loader Slack. It's fine. That's been good for so far.
Hmm.
Okay, yeah,
And if you
follow
need to
up.
pair on something, I usually have time on Tuesdays and Thursdays for Node stuff. So if you just give me like a bit of heads up, I can jump on.
Yeah, I think what would be the most effective to pair on would just be to figure out what I was doing wrong that's causing it to where I'm doing it to be part of the worker thread.
Okay.
Yeah, other than that, I'm pretty good. There's like I said, I have a list of things that I was making, but I'll post that in the Slack and we can follow up there.
Okay, cool.
Should we do Jeff's first? Because he is our
Yes.
guest today.
Yeah, let's do him. I think mine is easy, so let's do him.
Hopefully mine's easy. Yeah, so how does this work? I can just run through what I'm proposing is that right now my understanding is the loaders has 3 hooks, but really one is to kind of set things up, and then there are really 2 runtime hooks. So there's the initialize and then the load and resolve. What I'm proposing is that we could do kind of one of 2 things. One is we could change the paradigm. So instead of the resolve and load hooks being module level named exports, and therefore kind of coupling the loader to that module instance, module record, we could move to a situation, to a scenario where initialize produces an object or registers handlers for those different load and resolve hooks. Or a non-breaking kind of incremental change, which is what I've got in the PR, where initialize returns an object that can optionally contain a resolve and load or load method. And so the motivation for this is that right now, like I said, it seems like a loader is coupled to the module instance, and so it's kind of becomes a singleton. So if you have a loader at a particular resolved URL, that loader is kind of single use. You cannot parameterize it and use it in the same loader code in the same file for two different but similar use cases. And that's, you probably could with some crazy hacks, but the parameterization coming in on initialize would need to be stored as module level global state so that the load and resolve hooks could access it. And so it would be difficult to say for this call to resolve which initialization is relevant. What are the load and resolve bits of configuration that I should be using for this? And I think it also makes it a little challenging to test.
Oh, that's in the case where it gets registered multiple times, like the same hooks get registered more than once?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And so let's say you have a hook that is kind of a general purpose hook transformation. Like, I'm thinking, what if you want an ecosystem built on this? You have a generic loader. What does that look like, and what
I'm just
possible?
imagining, like, we have that CoffeeScript example in there, and I like to use CoffeeScript just because it's a lot simpler than TypeScript, and so it makes for a good example. And it has 3 file types. If you happen to define, for whatever reason, maybe in initialize, you have to pass in a value of what file type you want done. So like, okay, well, this one gets .coffee, and then you call it again for .lit coffee or whatever. So now you've got the situation like you have, like you're describing, where the same hooks got registered twice, but with different setup info. Jacob, you have your.
Oh, yeah. So I wanted a more concrete scenario of like what the actual problem is to solve. So like vaguely, yes, they are singletons, and if you want to do something like a general thing to do multiple specific things, but like what are those things? But okay, so but why would you need them to handle different versions, not versions, but different like files of CoffeeScript? Like, doesn't it just generally handle them?
I mean, that's a trivial example that like, yeah, real world code wouldn't need that. But I'm thinking, like one of the examples, or you want to answer it for it?
I've got like I don't know. I've done some like some of these funny little pseudo frameworks that never got anywhere. But let's say Markdown. You've got you might want to translate Markdown in one way and MDX in another way, and use the same loader for both. But say that for extensions of MDX, I would like to, in addition to doing the Markdown transform, I want to invoke that loader with the additional transformation to convert these like React bits of syntax into JSX transpile stuff.
Within your loader, look at the file extension and say, okay, if it's just MD.
I mean, you could. I was just. I'm sure there's solutions to this. I think.
I mean, the other
my
example that
perspective
comes up is running tests against loaders.
Yeah.
Like if you wanted to, call register, loaders are registered, then you like have it import a file. You see that the result of, say that transpiled TypeScript or transpiled CoffeeScript or Markdown, whatever, is a certain thing. And then, okay, well now register the loader with different initialization settings and then import something to send it through the pipeline and compare the result. Like rather than spawning a new node process each time.
But that's already, you don't have to do that. That's already easily addressed by putting like a generational query parameter on it.
I guess so, yeah. I mean, I don't have a strong opinion. I saw
on the URL of what you're calling register with, you mean?
Yeah, just use a dynamic import, put a query parameter it could be just a simple integer, or it could be like a more human-friendly descriptive thing. And then you get a different one each time, and it has its own state.
Well, it's like making a different singleton each time. Yeah. You could.
Yeah.
So like,
I thought
I'm not saying
I saw the
like,
API and I thought
totally
there was
unnecessary. I'm just saying like, I'm like having trouble understanding what problem we actually need to solve. Because like it's really easy to do the testing scenario, and we don't have to change anything at all. And the danger of changing is like breaking them or yada yada yada. So like what do we? Yeah, like what do we actually need to fix? Is it just we
Well,
don't
what was
like
the thing that
if you don't like the
a bit of an
design?
opinion, like it's a
mentioned
stylistic
in the thread?
Oh no, there's something about like a whole bunch of workers. I didn't understand that use case.
I don't understand that either. Okay, thank God. Okay. Like Gil mentioned this, and he authors quite a few libraries that leverage this, and he does some like very sophisticated things. So that makes me think that there is a real problem. I just don't understand what that problem is.
He writes, we still have an open issue regarding communication with a hook, e.g. an API that changes thing in the hook when there are multiple worker threads. If we call initialize for each worker thread, and each worker thread has their own port and resolve and initialize, then this is a problem solved, as each worker thread will have its own port and the thread will have their own state per worker thread.
But what are the worker threads? Is this the ESM, like the loader worker thread, or is it their own worker threads? Because currently, I don't know if we still have the issue where you potentially get multiple loader threads spawned, but that's a bug to fix, and there should only be one. I don't remember if that was already fixed. So I don't know if he's talking about that, or if he's talking about like if a library is spawning multiple threads and they want those individual threads to have independent module states. Do we know?
I don't know. I mean, you could just reply to, it's 50042. You can ask Gil what he meant.
I suspect it might be a use case that trick of, I don't know, the generational query param might solve.
I
Well,
think
I-
like,
have different
that trick is
rod-
actually his trick. So
Oh,
I
okay.
guess the question is like, this feels like, oh, you want to write your hooks as methods of a class. And whereas like, you don't want the whole module to be an implicit class, so, a not quite class, right? And then that class can maintain its own state. It can have multiple instances. Like you can create a new instance every time initialize is called, and so on. I mean, that sounds fine to me. I think like, I really don't want to remove the current like module scoped hooks of resolve and load now, because I don't want to break everyone for not really that strong of a reason. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like, we could add this in addition, and it just becomes another way to define the hooks. If you chose, you would have to decide like what happens when both are present. Like
Both.
if initialize returns resolve, there's also an export function resolve defined. But that could just be, you just make a decision and document it. So this
In my
doesn't really
PR, I
bother
made
me
that
in any way, but I do see Jacob's point that like, I feel like before we add anything, we should define what the problem it solves is, and is it not already solved in some not too difficult way? Because if it's just about, oh, I want to use class syntax, like, well, you could write a class that has static methods and then export const resolve equals class instance dot resolve, say, right? Like I guess the question is like, what's really impossible today, or maybe possible but very complicated today, that this makes a lot easier? I think we should probably have a good answer for that before we merge it in. And I'm assuming there is an answer to that. Gil seems to think there is. So we should just like get it written down in a way that we all can understand it. And then I think like this should be fine to merge in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and like I would be more in favor of initialize returning hooks and say that we use them and then be a class than changing the whole loader to like it has to return a class kind of thing. And I think that would be a much smoother change for the community.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to drop real quick, but I would say that is what I did in the PR. So I took the position that I don't want to break the community. In the PR, what is implemented is that if you return an object with those hooks, they will be used. If you try and return both, if your loader module has an exported hook and also attempts to return it, that is a bad scenario it throws. I didn't know exactly what kind of throw we would want to do, but I took the cautious approach that is invalid use of the feature. Totally open to the wisdom of folks who.
I mean, I think we can certainly start with that, and then if someone comes up with a reason why you need to have a defined resolve export that could be overridden instead, then we can always change a throw to like the other behavior, but it's hard to go the opposite way.
Yeah.
And I noticed that these are implemented as a sort of queue or linked list or whatever the data structure is internally. There is always the option of allowing both, but then what has priority? And that sounded
hooks in the chain.
Yeah, that sounded scary. Yeah, and so I just wanted to take the more prudent approach, and that's what I threw in. But really appreciate the opportunity to speak to this. I've got to drop though.
Okay, cool.
Sorry, folks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Cheers.
We'll see you. All right. External formats.
Yes. Okay, so I think in terms of the implementation, if we want to automatically call a register entry point that it doesn't exist in the pull request right now, but I can add it without too much trouble. I just want to make sure that
What do you mean by automatically call a register?
if a package has a register entry point and it is imported via -- import, that it
Okay, that kind of, I thought you were
automatically
talking about
called.
I thought you were talking about the other register API. Okay, yeah,
Oh.
a named export called register.
Yeah,
Okay,
I think that's a good idea. I don't think we would run into breaking something that already exists in the wild because import -- import is relatively new. So there are probably not that many packages that happen to have a register named export. Named entry point.
well, when would this automatically, like, I thought that the PR was like basically being like, oh, you just tried to import a TypeScript file. There's no hooks to handle a TypeScript file. Here are some instructions for how to set up hooks to handle this for you.
Yeah,
And
so there's
and that's
three
it.
phases. Yeah, so the initial one just tells them you need to do some stuff. Like this is TypeScript. This is what you need to do to get it to work. And those manual steps that it's telling you to do, you need to set this as -- you need to find
Right, I remember the instructions, but yeah.
okay, yeah. So part of those instructions are you need to do a -- import of an extension package. And one of the things that is like a defining characteristic of an extension package is it must have a named entry point of register, and then it will automatically call that.
Well, it's not automatically being called. It's calling it because you put a -- import something / register in when you run Node.
Well, yeah, but it's just like -- import package name. It's not / register. Or we could make it / register.
I was assuming it was made / register because like then you're not changing anything. Like there's no breaking changes here. Like we're just like making an error message a lot more verbose, but like the steps to make TypeScript work are the same as they are today. You know what I mean?
Okay. Well, in that case, we don't have to tell them to make it a named entry point called register. They would have to have something. Well, if we want to automate this in future, we do.
I think so. I mean, I'm not saying that this is the best way, but like, before you wrote your PR, what I had pitched was like, on unknown file type, if it's something we understand, like, oh, we know what they meant by .ts, the instructions would be as simple as like run npx set up TypeScript support, and then that would like download some package from the npm registry that would inspect their package.json and their app and prompt them with a bunch of questions like, what do you want to use to run TypeScript? TS Node, TypeScript, TSX, whatever. How do you run Node? Through a scripts in package.json, blah, blah, blah. And, and it would like basically be like a wizard that guided them through installing this, like kind of like how you see in some of the newer frameworks that have CLIs, where it's like when you set it up, it's like, do you want to install the ESLint? Do you want to install Prettier? And it like adds config files and stuff. This tool, this script would just kind of do that for them. And, and it would error if their project was set up in a way that they couldn't understand. Yeah, Wes?
Yes. That's what my thing more or less does. Like it does the phase one of that.
I was just going to mention, if you do go about creating that package, pkg.js would be a good place to put something that helps people get on with this. And one of the things we're actually hoping to do, which has crossover with this group, is build a exports scaffolding tool, just you just mentioned for this feature. So we have a package in there called create package JSON, which means you can run npm init package-json, and it will scaffold you out of package.json, and it does the same sort of interactive workflow. So it would be great if we combined forces on those kind of things, because we need to do
like if I could just leverage that, that'd be
exports
great.
anyway. And we have some infrastructure in there, and we have Darcy got us the package name PKG, create-PKG. So for the package use case, we're actually we have the start, it's very rough still, of a generator for people. So they'll be able to type npm init PKG and get a node package maintenance working group approved scaffold. Whatever that means is sort of still pretty nebulous. But the idea is like npm has never landed module type or exports in their init, and they're basically just never going to. So we want to be starting to set people up with
they might land type. It might become type .js, but now that we landed the module detection, and so apps are going to be slower if they don't have type. I think that might finally be the prod to get them to do it.
I went to a ton of those RFC calls, and this got brought up like for probably a whole year and never done. And Darcy,
when was the most recent one?
Well, they don't do them anymore. So
there's a new. So Miles is still pushing it, and he opened a new one within this year. So I wouldn't assume it's not going to happen. I grant
if somebody's pushing from inside the house, like if somebody from GitHub NPM is pushing for it, then that's fine. I hope we get it, but I think they had at one point all said, let's move this into user land, and let's because even just npm init is not, anyway, this is sort of a rabbit hole on that topic. But my point with that was just to say, I think there's a collaboration point here. We have some stuff that's sort of prior art in this area in PKG.js. And so that's owned by the Node project.
I think this is raising the question though of I think it sounds like we have an agreement that phase one is just spit out a really good error message and add something to the docs that tells people how to do this today. Or maybe phase one is just add something to docs telling people how to do this. And step two is improve the error message to link to that doc. And that's okay, you're not changing anything other than the error message, you're not changing anything in Node core itself, right? So then the question is okay, so where do we want to go after that? And it's sort of we can kind of go in two directions. One would be somehow make this kind of automatic, where instead of printing out this error message where Node knows what you want to do, Node itself could somehow do the configuration or something. Or the other option would be instead of the error message directing them to a document with instructions, the error message could give them a command to run that downloads a script to do it for them. I kind of feel like sorry, go ahead.
I feel like those are almost the same thing. The difference between A and B is a tiny line of code.
Well, the difference between A and B is whether the script that does this configuration setup stuff is included within Node proper or something that gets downloaded on the band when you run npx, PKG, whatever. I think it probably needs to be the latter, because people are going to freak out if Node makes network calls, other than you writing code to use HTTP and all that. Node should never just make a network call because an error was thrown. Do you know what I mean?
Well, what I was thinking in ladder, the ladder phases. So it has done the detection. It knows that it's TypeScript. It would tell you that you need to do something. You have to hit enter. Then it would use process spawn or whatever, run npm search, blah, 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 blah. It gets the results back as JSON. It enumerates them. You pick one of them or you abort. When you pick
right, you're basically describing what I was thinking would be in the npx script.
Yeah.
Here's the thing is we could write it as the npx script, update the error message to point to it, and then be all right, let's move this script into Node core and see if people object. I'm pretty sure they will, but we could always just treat it as another phase, because it's actually more useful as an NPX script because then it's not attached to some version of Node. Like it could apply all the way back to as far back as we want, like Node 18, like Node's, I was gonna say Node 16, but it's end of life, so why bother? But
Okay.
like you could do both, is what I'm saying. Like start with it as an NPX script that we publish in some place that we control. And then
Okay.
if there's some, we could even make it like you're saying, like you press enter to do the steps. You could even make it like press enter to run NPX package
Yeah,
add type
exactly.
or whatever. And then it's like still like essentially as automated as it could almost be with requiring one key press from the user, but not like bundled,
Yeah,
And if
actually,
it's not bundled,
that
then
is
you're
good.
free to use whatever dependencies you want.
That's
If
what I
you
was going to say.
wanna-
There's a pretty strong case here for not bundling, because I think that there's, as much as I'm usually one of those people like saying, no, add more stuff. It's fine. It'll be better. In this case, I actually think there's a pretty strong thing because, for example, there's a ton of utility ways to approach making these utility tools and giving users control over how they want to set that up. If the TypeScript team wants to give a slightly different recommendation than whatever we have, then that can be done more easily in something that's not shipped with Node Core. Because if we ship it with Node Core, then say they want to make that change, now those people have to be on the Node version that is doing it. Whereas we can just make that change and ship the library and have Node Core's, independent API contract. We can make breaking changes to the scaffolding. Like there's all sorts of things that you get out of being separate for a tool like that. That's really more about like user land opinion forming or something. I don't know if that's the right way to say it.
Well, and we could also have multiple scripts. Like,
Yes.
maybe TypeScript triggers a command that says npx run, add TypeScript support. And then we have a different one that's add CoffeeScript support, add whatever support. And then it's like, they don't have to be the same scripts with the same dependencies and all the rest.
Yeah, like if you are an informed user and you already know about the TypeScript official one, you would just run that before you try to run node main TS, and then it would just work because it's already configured. So yeah, okay.
I mean, ideally it becomes bundled into like Node init, where like it's another question in Node in npm init. I mean, like just as like a lot of frameworks have like add TypeScript support, add ESLint support, like npm init could be doing all these things, but yeah, that might be asking too much of them. But
so
I don't want to speak for them, but I just want to say that we have had this conversation over and over again, and the only way I see us making progress there is by doing it in user land. And we have a pretty good path forward to do these things in user land. We literally already have the packages. They're already published. Y'all could go jump in and start PRing there today. We just need to get users on it. So like, to me, that's better than having a for-profit entity own this thing that has caused,
do you mind posting somewhere like exactly where these packages are and like,
sure, yeah, I can open
the
a thread.
process for creating some script that could be run via a command and so on?
Yeah, I can open an issue for that.
Awesome. Yeah, that would be great to know. Like, yeah, if I wanted to make the npx, what's the command? Is npx run or something like that? Or
no, just npm.
npm init will run any package. So if you do npm init react-app, that actually runs create-react app, the main thing. So any create-prefix.
So that's what I'm trying to remember. That's not npx, it's npm init. Okay. So yeah, like if I wanted to create npm init, add TypeScript support, or Node.js / add TypeScript support, say, or whatever. That would be like, yeah, how would
we have a scope that I think there's two scopes technically that we own here. We own both Node.js and PKG.js. The original design of PKG.js was to be tools which are tightly coupled to the Node.js ecosystem for package authors, which I think this fits
Well,
close because it's
No,
more
no,
for
no.
authors.
This is
But
for
like-
users. So I think
Right,
users
yeah.
would use the Node.js, and then authors would use package to
Yeah.
like initialize.
and that also
the
would make it feel less scary if you're an end user who doesn't know how
Yeah.
to set this stuff up. If it's like end Node.js / something, they would probably feel more confident running that sight unseen than package.js, which they probably don't recognize,
Yeah, like the package one, I think would be fine for an author of
like give me a boilerplate of
yeah, exactly.
package
So
that
it sets up
provides module
the
hooks.
named export register. It creates a, I don't know, hooks dot whatever. Okay, cool. So next steps. Do I add the automatically? No, do we just tell in the docs?
Can we
Just tell
split up these
authors
PRs
to-
maybe? Like just have one PR, that's the docs thing. And then
Mhm.
like, let's just get that settled and landed. And then the second PR, that's like the new error message that then like causes the docs thing.
Well, I think we need to, in the docs one or something, we have to have the detection of this is, or do you want the detection part of the error message to say like, hey, this is a TypeScript file?
Well, I guess the question is like, are the docs generic? Like this is how to add support for any unsupported file type. In which case, why bother doing a detection for TypeScript? Like it could just like anything that's not on our allow list
Mhm.
prints this message that says, go here to learn how to add support for unsupported file types.
Well, because as in my PR, there are two errors. There's a recognized one that we don't support, and then there's like unrecognized, like, good luck. Something's wrong.
I think that like the recognized one, basically the difference in my mind between the two cases is that for a recognized one, we could tell them exactly what to do. Like the recognized one, it could be like run npm init Node.js / add TypeScript, and bam, they're done. Whereas like the unrecognized one, it's like, well, you got to search to see if there's a package that supports your file type. And then if there is one, you do this, and and we might not be able to automate that. So I think there's value in having the recognized path. I guess that the doc would be for the unrecognized path, because the recognized one we're eventually going to be automated. I mean, the doc could if it describes unrecognized, that'll handle any file type. So
Well, I think it
doc is
would be
generic in that sense.
for phase
Sorry,
one, it would cover both of them because what actually needs to happen is the same.
Right, it's just either
right now,
for the recognized one, we'll script it for them.
yeah, exactly.
I was just gonna say we could use npm's like tag search or something to just say
Yeah.
like we could
That's what
publish.
we're
Yeah, that's what we were discussing in the thread. It's the keywords field in package.json.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what we plan to use for the automation to automatically list the things. Okay, so what are we doing now? Okay, so
is it possible? I mean, would it make sense to just do one PR that's just the new doc thing? Because adding a top level page to the docs is itself a pretty big deal. Like that's gonna get a lot of attention. So that might be something that we should do on its own. And then we can add the error message that talks about it.
do we need to wait? Do we want to automatically run a register named entry point?
I
No.
think so. Because lots of people might have TypeScript or other packages in their dependencies that they don't want registering hooks into Node.
Well,
say
this is only a package that was explicitly imported with -- import. So if you do -- import foo,
if you're going to do
and-
-- import package name, just do /register, or if the package only exists for this purpose, then maybe like they could have the main entry point of the package be a JS file that calls
that
register.
works when a user is manually writing this, but when it's automated, we need to know. So we need to know whether In many cases, it would not be that the package is exclusively like as you yourself said, like TS node. It wouldn't be the main entry point of the package. So I think we need to say, at the very minimum, you must have a named entry point of something, and then because we have to write.
I think we should think about that more, because like, for example, CoffeeScript already has a /register. You know what I mean? And so it's like, if you're requiring this in order to like work within this new thing, it has to have this exact name, then that might cause conflict with packages that are, you know, like if I were CoffeeScript, I would want to be able to add support for this without needing to publish a whole new package, you know.
But this is only when it is -- imported.
Yeah.
But a -- import, doesn't that already need to have very specific things in it? So like you can't just
No,
--
it just has to resolve to a file.
No, but
It's the
that
same.
file that it resolves to, doesn't it have to contain like very specific things?
No, it just runs any JavaScript file. It's like it's like an import statement.
Oh, okay. Ugh. Well, shit.
Now I see where you're coming from and why you were thinking this way. No, I mean, like just like -- require foo.js, it just arbitrarily runs foo.js before running the main entry point. -- import does exactly the same thing. It's just instead of only supporting CommonJS the way require does, it supports CommonJS or ESM. But that's it.
Okay.
It's just a way of running any arbitrary JavaScript. You can even run a data URL as -- import. And it'll
I knew that. I thought that the file that, I don't know why I thought this, but for some reason I thought that the file that it led to had to like do very specific things because it runs on the main thread instead of in like the loaders thread and yada yada yada.
The only thing that's a little different is that the main entry is parsed as a file path, whereas what you pass to -- import is parsed as an import specifier. So URL or a bare specifier, you know, which can't be like the main entry point. But that's like the only difference, really.
I think we have to figure this out before we can land the doc, because the doc needs to say this. It needs to say what to do.
Well, the doc is always doing two things. Like you're describing COS. You're describing like to package authors how to write these packages, but you're also describing to users how to set up their project and use them. And
yes,
like that should probably be two separate sections.
I think they're coupled, because you can't tell users do this thing and then tell package authors do this other thing. They have to meet.
I'm sure they could both be in the same PR, but like it's we shouldn't intermix it. Like it's two sections, like for users and for authors.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So,
but we still have to decide because we have to tell both of them what to do.
Right. I mean, we could.
Exactly.
I don't know. I think there's trouble with like mandating a special export like register because it's already in wide use. Although that's kind of ideal because we want people to not have to do something special for this to work. I mean, we could have something where it's like some extra field in package.json that's like, you know,
Antoine and I talked about this when we were originally putting together the initial implementation of the pull request. And that was our initial thought. And then we were like, but exports is already doing all that we need. Right.
I mean, if you picked an obscure name, like Node.js custom module hooks, it's like, okay, well, nobody's going to have that as an export already. So like, okay, then it's like module authors that have that, and they put Node.js custom module hooks in the keywords. Like definitely this package has been written with the intent that it follows the spec that we're defining in this document. Therefore, it can be like kind of automatically like loaded